The grand chamber of the Galactic Accord was filled with light, voices, and pride. Dozens of species, each more advanced than the last, floated, walked, or hovered in their seats, representing over 80 civilizations. Their flags shimmered across the walls, and translators whispered every word in hundreds of dialects. A signal had been received from the edge of the Perseus arm, too structured to be natural and too deep in space to be from any known outpost. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow, distant, and deliberate. The larger empires, the Gur with their war fleets, the Zal scientists with brains like living stars, called for careful observation but refused to act directly. They spoke of caution, protocol, and preserving resources. But when the human delegation stepped forward, newcomers to the Accord, barely a century into interstellar travel, they didn't speak of courage or glory. Instead, their lead representative, Ambassador Karine Moss, calmly suggested a temporary freeze on exploration in the region. She asked for time to analyze the signal's pattern more deeply and proposed creating a shared task force to study its origin. Around the chamber, whispers turned into snickers. The larger species called it fear, some even called it cowardice. The humans were described as slow thinkers, overly cautious, obsessed with safety, and unlikely to survive without guidance. The Gur commander leaned over to his aide and said loudly, "Let the brave handle this," drawing laughter from nearby delegates. But while others laughed, the humans did not. They left the chamber with quiet steps and thoughtful faces. Back on Earth, they did not wait for permission. In hidden orbit above the moon, Earth's scientific command gathered its best minds. The signal was studied in ways no other species had considered, mapped with music, broken into rhythm, viewed like architecture. Something about it didn't feel random. It was not just calling out, it was warning. When an unmanned probe sent by the Tolar Collective vanished without a trace after entering the signal's source zone, many in the Accord labeled it a technical failure. But human analysts knew better. The last broadcast from the Tolar probe had a strange distortion, as if the message was being rewritten mid-sentence by something else. Still, the Council dismissed it. With political voices rising and empires unwilling to act unless they could claim credit, no species volunteered to investigate further. No one, that is, except the humans. While the Accord argued, humanity launched Vigilant Hope, a small stealth-capable vessel equipped with the best sensors Earth had to offer. It was led by Captain Ely O'Rourke, a strategist with a calm mind and sharp instincts. She had no medals for combat, no record of glory, but she had saved lives in more than one quiet crisis that never made headlines. When asked why she was chosen, Earth's defense chief said, "We don't need a hero. We need someone who knows how to survive." The mission was launched without ceremony, with the world watching through a quiet live stream from Luna Base. As Vigilant Hope slipped into fold space and vanished from view, most of the Galactic Accord had already moved on to other matters, confident that nothing would come of it. But in the minds of the humans, and especially in the silence that followed the probe's disappearance, a quiet understanding had grown. Something was out there, something old, powerful, and possibly watching. Humanity had always been accused of being afraid of the unknown, but maybe that fear wasn't weakness, maybe it was wisdom. And while the powerful species of the galaxy waited, proud and unbothered, it was the so-called cowards who took the first step into the dark. While the larger civilizations of the galaxy continued to argue over who should investigate the strange signal and how, Earth moved without noise or applause. Hidden from the eyes of the Accord, humanity launched the Vigilant Hope, a sleek, dark vessel designed not to fight, but to survive. It did not carry powerful weapons or shields like the ships of the Gur or Zal. Instead, it was built with silence in mind. Engines that barely hummed, a hull coated with adaptive materials, and sensors tuned to pick up the faintest of whispers in space. At its helm stood Captain Elia Rourke, not a warrior by the galaxy's standards, but a tactician who had spent her career avoiding battle through calm logic, fast thinking, and deep analysis. She had saved colonies from collapse, rerouted ships through asteroid fields with seconds to spare, and once convinced a rogue AI fleet to stand down using only words. To some, her name meant caution, even hesitation. To others, it meant survival. The Accord didn't understand this kind of leadership. When news of her departure leaked, more than one council member laughed. "Sending cowards to face the void?" one of them said during a press gathering. But Earth didn't respond. There were no counter-statements or attempts to defend her. Humanity had already decided. Elia Rourke was the right one for this. Inside Vigilant Hope, the mood was focused, but quiet. The crew was small, just 20 experts chosen not for their strength, but for their calm minds and careful hands. They had trained for months in silence, learning to operate in near darkness, practicing low-oxygen drills, and running simulations of total system failure. As they approached the edge of the Perseus arm, the stars thinned. Space felt heavier, here, not in gravity, but in presence, like something ancient was watching. Their instruments began to twitch with data that didn't make sense. Gravity fluctuations came and went without warning, and small objects outside the ship shifted in ways that defied known laws. Even light moved strangely, bending where it shouldn't. At first, the static in their communication systems was brushed off as interference. But then patterns started forming. The noise wasn't random. It pulsed in rhythms that echoed the signal they'd come to investigate. Elia listened closely, playing back the recordings again and again. One night, deep in shipboard time, she sat alone in the observation deck, watching a distant black shape move against the stars. It was massive, silent, and turning slowly, as if it had just noticed her ship. She ordered the crew to halt all outgoing signals and darken the vessel. From that point on, they operated in complete silence. Then came the last transmission Earth received. It was short, just a burst of data, but it held gravitational maps, sensor logs, and a final voice message. Rourke spoke with steady calm, saying they were nearing the source and expected close contact. Her words carried no panic, only purpose. She ended with, "We believe fear is not weakness. It's preparation. We are ready." After that, nothing more came. The Vigilant Hope vanished from every channel, leaving Earth to wait and wonder. No signs of distress, no final cry, just silence, deep and complete. Around the galaxy, most assumed the humans had failed. Some mocked them again. Others dismissed the event entirely. But back on Earth, experts studied every byte of the last message. They rewatched the final visuals, where stars twisted unnaturally near the anomaly. Something was there, something the rest of the Accord had ignored. And while the galaxy remained, proud and still, Earth began to prepare quietly once more. Because they knew something many others had forgotten. Sometimes silence is not a sign of peace. Sometimes it means something far worse is listening. Far beyond the borders of known space, where stars faded into cold and distance, the Vigilant Hope moved silently through the dark, guided by instinct and fear. Captain Elia Rourke and her crew had reached the edge of the anomaly zone, and what they found was not what anyone had expected. Floating in orbit around a collapsed star was a structure beyond imagination, massive, ancient, and clearly not of human or any known origin. It was not a warship, not a space station, and not a signal emitter. It was something stranger, a warning beacon, but not one meant to be heard. It was meant to be found, by those who came too close. From a distance, it resembled a broken crown, with arcs of dark metal orbiting a black void, held in place by forces unknown. As the Vigilant Hope drew near, the crew picked up strange radiation signatures and magnetic fields pulsing in rhythmic patterns. They recorded everything, and quietly, without alerting the council, transmitted logs back to Earth through encrypted channels. These were not calls for rescue. They were observations, careful and focused. Rourke's voice in the logs was steady. "This is not an enemy position," she said. "It's a grave, and someone built a headstone big enough for the stars to see." Inside the structure, small survey drones explored narrow corridors and deep chambers where gravity shifted strangely, and time seemed to stretch. There were no life forms, no heat. But deep within the heart of the construct, the drones found a central chamber filled with glowing structures that resembled data crystals. These weren't powered by electricity, but by something deeper. Perhaps thought, or memory, or even time itself. The walls pulsed softly with shifting colors, and among the shifting lights, the drones detected repeating fragments of language, dozens of them, layered one over another. Human analysts back on Earth began decoding the fragments. Some were familiar, old dialects, even whispers of long-lost alien tongues recovered from ruins across the galaxy. Others were completely new. But one phrase echoed in all of them, repeated, over and over again in every form. "We lost. Run." It wasn't a threat, not a challenge. It was a record, a warning from those who had come before, a message left behind by a civilization that had once stood at the edge of greatness and fallen. The beacon was not meant to stop anyone. It was a signpost, telling all who passed what had happened there. Rourke made it clear in her logs, this was not a battlefield, it was a memorial. And something had wiped that civilization away so completely that even their name had been erased. More disturbing still, Earth's analysts discovered from the signal patterns that the destruction had been recent, not in human terms, but in galactic ones. The collapsed star was only a few thousand years old. Whatever had destroyed them had done so fast, cleanly, and without leaving much behind. And the worst part was the final discovery. The signal still pulsed outward, not randomly, but in a pattern that changed slightly every few months, as if updating its message. Something was still out there, and it was still active. The conclusion was simple and terrifying. The force that ended that civilization hadn't stopped. It hadn't gone dormant. It was moving. And if the signal's timing was any clue, it was getting closer. Earth responded not with panic, but with urgency. Secure facilities activated emergency protocols. Research stations went dark to avoid detection. And leaders began preparing for the possibility that they might be next. But they didn't make noise. They didn't alert the Accord. They knew what would happen if they spoke too soon. Instead, they listened. To Rourke, to the data, to the silence of space. Because now they understood. First contact hadn't been with a living species, or a new ally, or a dangerous enemy. It had been with a grave. And now, something beyond that grave was coming toward the living. The Galactic Accord gathered again, this time under a sense of quiet discomfort. The chamber, once filled with laughter at humanity's caution, now buzzed with mixed whispers. Earth had sent a transmission from Vigilant Hope, a final message before the ship had gone silent. The humans had decrypted part of the strange signal, near the edge of the Perseus arm, and added their own analysis. They showed gravitational distortions beyond normal space-time behavior, energy readings unlike any weapon or tool known to the Accord, and most disturbing of all, audio patterns that echoed ancient distress calls found in long-dead systems. Humanity's ambassador, Corrine Moss, stood in the center of the council floor as the message played. Her voice was calm, but beneath her words lay something colder, concern sharpened by urgency. She explained what Captain Rourke's crew had encountered, including the warning recorded in multiple lost alien dialects. "We lost. Run." The humans were not claiming to understand everything, but they were certain that something was out there, something intelligent and possibly ancient. Yet instead of silence falling over the chamber in reflection, laughter returned. The Zentari, known for their intelligence and pride, stood and declared it a hoax. They accused the humans of staging the data to gain influence in the Accord. The Gur, the proud warriors, shook their heads and claimed the readings were exaggerated. To them, fear was a foreign concept. Even the Verhil, one of the most careful and analytical species in the Council, labeled the message as likely the remains of a fallen civilization, destroyed by its own errors. "You humans and your fear," said the Gur representative, voice booming. "This is why you hide behind shields and strategies. You always assume the worst." The other members chuckled, some dismissively, others politely, but none with the seriousness the message deserved. Still, Moss did not raise her voice. Instead, she played one last recording, the final voice transmission from Vigilant Hope. It was Rourke's voice, steady and calm as always, echoing through the chamber. She did not beg for attention. She did not argue with those who would not. "Listen." She spoke simply, describing the impossible structure her crew had seen. A massive object floating beyond light's reach, surrounded by warped space and silence that seemed to press into the bones. Her final words rang clear. "We believe fear is not weakness, it's awareness. We face something we do not understand. And if we are cowards, then cowards may be your last hope." When the message ended, no one clapped, no one cheered. The Council moved to the next topic, business as usual. Privately, some ambassadors admitted they were unsettled, but publicly, they followed the mood of the powerful. Earth's findings were quietly archived. No fleets were sent, no investigations were approved. Once again, the Accord chose inaction. Back on Earth, the reaction was different. Scientists, engineers, and strategists met behind closed doors. Civilian preparations began in silence. Supply lines reorganized, communication systems hardened, underground networks tested. They knew they might not have the strength to fight, but they could learn, they could hide, they could prepare. Humanity had faced its own end before in different forms: disease, war, climate collapse, and it had survived, not through force, but through adaptability. Now, it leaned into that strength again. The Accord may have looked down on fear, but Earth knew fear had saved lives more times than pride ever had, and somewhere, far beyond known space, something was still out there, watching, waiting. Humanity didn't know what it was, but they knew what it wasn't. It wasn't a myth. It wasn't a hoax. It wasn't gone. And though the galaxy turned, its blind eye pretending all was well, one small world among many quietly made plans, because the warning was real. And humans, called cowards by the stars, were the only ones treating it like the truth. In the far reaches of neutral space, where star systems sat between claimed borders and political zones, a small colony named Veridon went silent. It wasn't a loud event. There were no alarms, no distress calls, no sudden bursts of energy, just a deep, unsettling quiet that began with missed messages and unanswered routine check-ins. At first, the Galactic Accord dismissed it as a technical issue. The colony was minor, barely holding a few thousand settlers and mostly known for mining gas from the thick rings of a dull planet. But as hours passed and communication systems failed to re-establish contact, concern turned into tension. A scout vessel from the Zavari Union was sent to investigate, armed, fast, and confident. Its systems went dark 15 minutes after entering. Veridon's orbit. Then came a second ship, this time from the Verhil, cautious and heavily shielded. It vanished even quicker. No explosions, no signs of struggle, just absence. Finally, a multi-species patrol of 3 ships was organized, one each from the Gur, the Zentari, and the Tolar, to show strength and unity. none of them returned. What little information they sent back in their final moments showed no enemy vessels, no incoming attacks, only a strange flickering distortion across their sensors, and then silence. The council was forced to notice. They gathered again, but the mood was different now. The jokes had stopped. The proud voices were quieter. There were still doubts, but they were no longer spoken with the same arrogance. Something had taken Veridon, something no one could see, negotiate with, or fight. It left no damage, no ruins, no messages. Entire structures, ships, and people were simply erased, removed with cold precision. Systems once alive with movement and sound now sat dark, as if nothing had ever been there at all. It was not a war. It was a disappearance. And slowly, painfully, the words of the humans began to echo louder in the minds of those who had once laughed. Earth's warnings, once mocked, now felt like a chilling prediction. The phrase, "we lost," "run," which had once been dismissed as paranoia, now sounded like advice. Ambassadors who had proudly dismissed fear began to ask questions behind closed doors. Council members who had once refused human data now requested it urgently. They wanted access to Earth's analysis, to the transmission from Vigilant Hope, to the quiet signals that had gone unnoticed. And for the first time, they turned to the very species they had called cowardly. Humanity, which had been quiet and careful, suddenly found itself at the center of attention. But Earth did not gloat. There were no "I told you so" statements. Instead, they responded with calm organization. Their defense ministry released an updated threat assessment, shared protocols, and opened secure channels to any species willing to listen. They spoke clearly: prepare not to fight, but to disappear if needed. Hide your worlds. Mask your signals. Do not call out to the dark. Some listened. Others still resisted the idea that a threat could exist that had no voice, no demands, no face. But even they were shaken. The silence from Veridon, the erasure of fleets, the calm disappearance of thousands of lives, it was too much to explain away. Panic didn't take the form of screams or riots. It showed in hesitation, in long pauses during council meetings, in the way commanders now double-checked every scan from deep space. And as the galaxy held its breath, looking for answers, humanity stood a little taller. Not because they were stronger, but because they had accepted fear long before anyone else. And in that fear, they had begun to prepare. The proud had waited too long. Now they turned to the ones they once ignored. Because something had come, and it had already begun to erase the edges of their map. As fear quietly spread through the Accord, humanity stepped into the light, not with weapons raised, but with a strategy no other species had prepared. While others scrambled to power up fleets and charge heavy weapons, Earth revealed something unexpected: Project Foldwall, a planetary-scale defense system designed not to destroy but to disappear. It had been years in the making, built in secret across moons, space stations, and deep orbital platforms, hidden even from Earth's own people. It was a plan not of strength, but of subtlety. Thousands of drone ships, identical in shape and heat signature to real vessels, were scattered across space, drifting silently and constantly broadcasting misleading signals. Giant satellites created electromagnetic shadows to hide whole settlements behind artificial distortions. Cities were quietly relocated beneath the surfaces of moons, inside hollowed-out asteroids, and deep within oceans, all under the harmless-sounding name of evacuation drills and civil emergency training. Civilian populations had been moved weeks before the first colony fell, long before the Accord even realized what was happening. It wasn't because humanity could see the future. It was because they were the only ones who truly accepted the risk of the unknown. Captain Aaliyah Rourke, still alive and orbiting near the edge of the anomaly zone in a hidden command platform, now served as the quiet conductor of Earth's greatest defense operation. She oversaw carefully timed signal pulses, each one designed to mislead the approaching threat. These pulses were crafted to mimic engine trails, system heat, and planetary activity. Each signal painted a false picture of where life might be, guiding the enemy away from hidden safe zones and toward empty space filled with nothing but decoys. Rourke's strategy was not built on the hope of defeating the unknown force. It was built on patience, precision, and the understanding that survival meant living to understand first, to strike only when necessary. Her team monitored the movement of the entity, not directly, since no image or scan had ever captured it, but by observing the quiet destruction it left behind. Entire Gur battle fleets disappeared after rushing in without scanning the space carefully. Their pride had led them straight into silence. The Zentari, believing their intelligence networks would protect them, watched in horror as their information, hubs and high-orbit satellites vanished, one after the other, in perfect rhythm, like a song being erased note by note. There were no explosions, just silence. Their systems went dark, their planets went quiet, and no one responded. And yet, Earth remained. It stood not because it was stronger, but because it had not tried to impress or overpower. It had simply stepped back, watched, and quietly built a net so complex and careful that even the stars seemed to be fooled. Humanity's doctrine was simple: survive first, fight last. While the rest of the Accord prepared for battle, Earth had prepared to disappear. And it worked. Across the Council, questions turned into requests. Species once proud now reached out for guidance, asking about Foldwall, requesting access to human drone patterns and stealth coding. Earth shared freely, not out of pride, but because they understood that fear was not weakness, it was wisdom. The threat still moved in the dark, erasing life in slow, calculated steps, but Earth had not lost a single city, not one major structure, not one signal hub. Their people continued working beneath thick rock, wrapped in shadows, safe not because they fought, but because they refused to be seen. This new kind of warfare, based on humility, deception, and survival, had no place in the minds of empires built on dominance. But now those same empires were watching, learning, and in some cases, begging. The enemy had not spoken. It had not declared its purpose. But it had made itself clear. Those who were loud vanished. Those who hid lived. And Earth, the so-called coward, had become the last clear light on the map of a fading galaxy. The Sol system, once full of light, movement, and human presence, now looked empty. From a distance it seemed abandoned. No transmissions, no orbital traffic, no sign of life. Earth itself floated quietly, its surface dark, its atmosphere calm, and its oceans still. The usual signs of intelligent activity, power grids, satellite chatter, beacon pulses, were gone. There was no greeting for the stars, no open signals, nothing to detect. And that was exactly how humanity had planned it. The entity had come at last, drifting without sound or shape through the far edges of known space. It didn't come with weapons or demands. It didn't speak or send warnings. It simply moved, and wherever it passed, things stopped existing. The Gur fleets had vanished. The proud satellites of the Zentari were gone. Worlds that had stood for centuries were now just empty orbits. And now it reached Sol, the home of the so-called cowards, the species once mocked for hiding behind shields and silence. But when the entity arrived, there was nothing to find. It searched in its own quiet way, pressing against gravity, sliding across electromagnetic waves, bending time slightly in strange patterns, but there was nothing. No minds to touch, no machines to observe, no lights to track. Earth offered only silence, and silence confused it. Hidden far from its path, on icy moons buried beneath layers of rock and ice, in dark stations with no heat signature, enfolded, dimensions created by experimental human physics, humanity watched without blinking. They didn't speak. They didn't reach out. They simply observed. Using systems powered by non-reflective energy loops and buried signal mirrors, they stayed invisible. In these hidden shelters, humans lived in controlled, quiet routines. Children learned to speak in signs. Engineers worked with tools that made no sound. Even their thoughts were monitored through neural dampeners to reduce brainwave spikes. Foldwall had evolved beyond deception. It had become a philosophy. To survive, humanity had let go of its need to be seen. In this cold, distant stillness, people found unity not in flags or triumph, but in silence and patience. The entity, after a long time circling the system and scanning empty planets, finally began to drift away. Whether it had grown bored, confused, or decided the system was lifeless, no one could be certain. But it left, and when it did, it took its darkness with it. The stars returned slowly. One by one, soft signals were allowed to rise, not beacons, not shouts, but gentle pulses, reaching out only to the hidden stations. The waiting was over, for now. Still, there was no celebration, no cheering, no songs. The people of Earth and its colonies did not consider this a victory. They had not defeated the entity. They had only escaped it. But they had done what no other civilization had managed. They had survived. When the hidden shelters opened and small communities emerged from shadow, they did so with quiet purpose. Systems were restored one at a time. Data was shared across encrypted channels. Engineers updated the Foldwall network, refining it even further. Humanity did not see themselves as heroes. They knew what they were: planners, adapters, survivors. For them, fear had never been something to run from. It was something to understand, something to respect. Because fear reminded them of danger, and danger reminded them to think, not to boast. The galaxy would remember Earth not for great battles, but for quiet wisdom. Other species, those who survived in scattered pockets, now looked to humans not with mockery, but with questions. They wanted to learn what Earth had learned. And for the first time in the history of the Galactic Accord, the quietest voice had become the one others listened to. Humanity had never been cowardly, they had simply been careful, and in that care, they had done what the bold could not. They had endured. Because in the vast darkness of space, survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about knowing when to speak, when to move, and when to be completely still.